Our next speaker is going to talk about what the cloud is going to look like in 20 years. And I'm really curious to hear this talk because I'm trying to think what it might look like in 6 months. And that's tough. But Peder Ulander is Vice President of Cloud Platforms from Citrix, and he's here to talk about the future of the cloud. Peder, come on out. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Good morning, everyone. First off, I have to apologize. I am from a big company. I am in marketing, and probably not what many of you expect when you come to LinuxCon to listen to what's going on. But I do promise you this. I won't give you a corporate pitch. I probably won't talk a lot about our products. I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing with regards to cloud computing and what's driving a lot of our actions, a lot of our investment, and kind of where we see the cloud moving in the next few years. The gentleman who was originally going to be giving this pitch, Mark Hinkle, unfortunately injured himself earlier, and I know a lot of you know Mark, so just know that he's here in spirit. These are his words, and hopefully I can do them justice in giving them to you. So we'll start with lessons learned. We've been thinking a lot about the cloud at Citrix. In the last year, we've made some aggressive moves, some acquisitions, some great investments, as well as adopting a lot of areas within the community, and that's driving where we see the market moving. The most important thing for us as we think about our strategy and as we think about where the cloud will be 20 years from now is really understanding what's happened in the last 20 years when we see transitions in marketplaces and shifts in technologies. There's also an important thing to realize that we need to recognize from other mistakes as well as those that we've made, very much like this kid who's about to get a little bit of a sting. So I think when we look at that and I go through these 10 core tenets that we use with regards to where we see the cloud moving, you'll understand that this is a different Citrix. This is also just a different vision than what many that have come before me. In fact, I saw the tension earlier. Many that have come before me with regards to where we see the cloud headed. So I'm going to start that one by saying Highlander was a great movie, but the premise of there can be only one has never proven out to be successful in any industry. In fact, when you think about there can be only one, that's how we ended up with VMware or Microsoft. The reality is when we go back to the evolution of open source, whether it was with regards to Linux distributions, we saw Debian, Canonical, Red Hat, etc., all of which had valuable places in the environment. All of them together helped dethrone the Solarises and the Unixes of the world. The same came from the database world, right? You think about Postgres, you think about MySQL, you think about the movement around Cassandra and the NoSQL movement, right? All of these together collaborated, co-optated, right? Co-opetition, and together helped basically create the industry and create the momentum. And we believe that's the case within the cloud. There will be a lot of various players at every layer of the stack, whether it's the infrastructure stack, the platform stack, or even a lot of the services and tools that are being delivered today. And it's through those communities that we believe the cloud will evolve over the next 20 years. And each and every one will be healthy in many ways with regards to the areas that they go after because they are focused on delivering for very specific things. Which brings me to my next point. While we are aggressively focused on being developers and passionate about technology, we have to continually think about users. About 5 years ago, I had the luxury of an opportunity to sit down with a small group of people to have dinner with a good friend of mine. And one of those individuals at that dinner was Evan Williams, the technology guy behind Twitter, who I hope many of you guys already know. One of the things when he talked about the success of Twitter that struck me was that he said the most important thing within the company that we strive for is that we are not only the technologists, but we are the passionate users, and we listen to our users because they will define where we need to go. They will define what's important for us to focus on next. And it's their usability that's absolutely critical to the success of the product. Now, when you think back to the last 20 years of Linux, that's very much been the case when you think about how the operating system has evolved, right? 20 years ago, we had Slackware. All of the developers focused on the technology, building really cool things. It was the dominant play in the operating system space. And then Red Hat came around. Red Hat made things easier. Red Hat focused on things that were very complex to the 99% of the industry that couldn't use Slackware. They focused on packaging, on interfaces, on ecosystems, and on value that enabled the common person to be able to take the technology and use it. Now, that was great for Red Hat as they grew, and today we can take a look at companies like Ubuntu, right? Here's another one that came out. They focused on usability. Ubuntu, from what I remember, is the Linux for everyone. That simplicity, that focus on the end user experience, that focus on making sure that the technology, the applications, and the services could get into the hands of everyone was in place, helped them basically evolve and grow. Now, going back to my Ulander principle, that's a great demonstration of where if we only had one provider, I don't think we'd be in the same position today with all of you in the room. I don't think we'd be sitting there thinking about Linux on the smartphone or Linux on the desktop, or Linux in the cloud. It might still just be a project where the 1% focus on the cool development stuff that you can do, but the enterprise probably couldn't have used it. This became a battle cry for us within Citrix and originally within the Cloud.com team that built our platform. We focused on that end user experience. Simple to install, simple to deploy, simple to deliver applications. And I think we have a long way to go. We're just in the beginning. And over the next 20 years, this stuff has to get easier to use. And that's where we focus on embracing our customers and bringing them into our community and actually having them help us drive the initiatives that we have within the product. So the one technology promise I think needs to be made, or statement around where the cloud is in 20 years, is really around the fact that manual software management doesn't scale. Again, referencing back to what we saw with regards to Linux, right? Red Hat did a phenomenal job owning that space because they figured out RPM, package management. They made it simple to install, to configure, to update, to upgrade, et cetera. They were effectively the automation of the software within one single instance. One of the biggest mistakes, and I was, just to put it in perspective, I was talking to Al Gillen, an analyst over at IDC yesterday, just outside in the hallway, that he pointed out is the enterprise or the business. Now remember, I'm the marketing guy, so I'm going to give you the business angle of where we see open source. But the businesses out there are having those challenges that the early adopters of Linux had. How do I install it? How do I upgrade? How do I use it? To that effect, one of the most important technology innovations around the cloud really comes in the form of DevOps and everything that we see with regards to what's coming out of Ops Code and Puppet. When I think about my largest clouds in the market today, that is the only common thread that goes across every single one of them. I know APIs are important. I know distributions are important, et cetera. This is the most critical thing when you want to get to scale. And as you start thinking about where the cloud will be in 20 years, these will be embedded inherent systems of how we build them out because they focus not only on the instance, they focus on all of the elements of the data center and create that true API for a data center service. So another premise that we run on is the fact that early adoption isn't a guarantee to success. We're in a position right now in the cloud market where there are a number of players out there. We're in front. We're leading. The market is over. We've set the standard. We don't believe that. And again, going back over the last 21 years, I gave you the example of Slackware to Red Hat to Ubuntu. We could talk about just disruption in a community from X386 to X.org, right? We win, we got it, this is how we're owning our community, and someone was dissatisfied and decides to fork, or a new distribution comes around that solves for a specific customer problem. We're in the very early days of cloud computing. If I were to draw parallel to where we are in the early days of Linux 21 years ago, we're probably right at that point in 1994, where about 3 years after Linus created his first distribution, and we saw commercial entities jumping on board. It's way too early to call it. So another thing that we think about inside of Citrix is the fact that only individuals have standing within the community, right? Again, going across the history of open source, it's individuals that helped us get to where we are today. It was not commercial entities. There was a strong push, of course, in the late 90s where people will say IBM's contribution of $1 billion into Linux is what drove it into the enterprise. Red Hat had already solved that with a number of very individual contributors that had made improvements in the kernel, improvements in the packaging modules that everyone could take advantage of that enabled it to move into the enterprise, right? We think that that is absolutely critical to a community in order for it to thrive. It can't be driven by commercial value. This was one of the main reasons why we made the decision with CloudStack to push it into the Apache Software Foundation. The Apache Software Foundation doesn't give you a vote if you have money. The Apache Software Foundation doesn't give you a vote if you have a big brand name. The only way you get a vote on a product or a technology inside of Apache is if you write code or add value to the project. You can't tell now, but when I was in university, I wrote crew. And we had an ongoing saying in between us and the fraternities, which was, we don't buy our friends, we earn our friends, right? That's what a community is, a set of individuals getting together as a team, operating in unison, and making things better overall versus driving towards financial impact. Another thing that's absolutely critical for Citrix with regards to how we view the cloud in the next 20 years is that all the work has to be done in the open. I go back to the kid sticking the knife into the outlet, learning from past mistakes. Citrix has not always been the most open of companies on a number of fronts, even when we had open source projects. We've learned from those mistakes. It doesn't make sense, especially in the early days of a technology, to throw something out into the market and then work on other things that add value and maybe give them out or maybe hang on to them or throw big balls of code out into the marketplace. We learned that the hard way. And when you look back at the evolution of Linux, that was the same thing. It was the communities that constantly focused on improving continuously in the open with contributors, with developers that help things move forward, right? This is the hardest thing for our developers to think about inside of the company and inside of the community. Be boring, but be useful. There's a strong point in that, because whenever a technology evolution happens, everybody wants to work on the latest and greatest things. Everybody has a better way for doing packet management. Here's how we do systems monitoring. Here's how we do storage. Here's how we do VM controls. Here's how we do all of these different things. Well, pretty soon your community, while it may be large, is a bunch of disparate systems that are completely uncoordinated and unfocused. Be boring. Find the solutions. Get them out into the marketplace today. Continue to evolve that project and maintain success with your customers as you move forward. When you look at where Linux hit the hockey stick in their growth 20 years ago, or not 20 years ago, this was probably more about 12 years ago, all of the great crazy innovation had stopped because Linus has said, wait a minute, listen. It doesn't make sense to put Linux in a car. It doesn't make sense to put Linux on a phone. It doesn't make sense to do all of these cool things you guys are doing. We are going to go back to basics and innovate here and make it stable, enable our customers to grow or the users to actually use the code. And it was at that point that Linux became boring in the early 2000s. And it was at that point that they took off in the business because they weren't overstretching the code. They became extremely useful to the marketplace, and they grew. This is a core tenet of what we think about within our cloud platforms team, and this is a core tenet of the community team driving the Apache Cloud Stack project. It's great that there are all these things way out there that we need to be thinking about. Let's get back and focus on the next release and how we enable this within our customer base and within our user base. I love this one. Good enough wins, but you have to be thinking about the future, right? There's the good when you think about the evolution of open source software over the last number of years. The reason why Linux succeeded was because it was a continuous development model where releases were put out into the marketplace on a monthly, quarterly basis. New feature, new functionality was brought out. It was never 100% perfect. It was never fully featured. There were definitely issues with it, but it was that constant beat that focused on innovating and driving that project forward that made Linux successful. Draw a parallel to what we saw with regards to the GNU Herd Foundation, right? These guys were searching for perfection. You didn't have the continuous development. It wasn't about getting everything out at once and enabling people to do it, right? That forced that community to flounder and in effect not grow. In the cloud today, when I talk to customers and when I talk to users, they don't have time to wait for that next release. They need to see that constant innovation. They expect and accept the fact that it's not perfect, but they need a solution today. So the faster that we can get them to that minimal viable product and deliver feature functionality and a roadmap that gets them forward through our community is absolutely critical and one of the core tenets in what we deliver. Now, I can tell you when I'm on the commercial side of the house, I've got a number of executives running around. When are we going to do this? How do we do that? Why are these guys ahead of us? What's going on? You always got to remind them Rome wasn't built in a day. Neither was the kernel, right? 91, we had a great thesis. 94, we had some distributions. 99, we had some people actually using it in the service provider space. It wasn't until 2005 that Linux hit its core track and started to grow. It took some time, right? And I think there is a massive rush of organizations today that come in and tell you, we've got it all. I'll tell you, they're all lying. Nobody has it all. There's a long way to go, and we're very, very early on in the cloud. And it's important for us as a community, and it's important for us as users to demand that vendors don't know all, that we do have influence over where it goes, and we're setting the priorities to make it right. And that's absolutely critical with regards to where it goes. So when you think about that, 20 years ago when Linus was sitting in his dorm room in Finland, did he think that he would be in the top 500 supercomputers in the world? Or that Linux would be powering 50% of the world's smartphones? Or that he would completely destroy a multi-billion-dollar business of software operating systems with this project that he built to run Unix on x86 systems? I don't think so. I don't think that he had any idea what Linux could have been 20 years later. So I can tell you, as we sit and think about the cloud in 20 years, we recognize, as I mentioned, we're about 3 years after that kernel was built. The cloud itself, where will the technology be? I have no idea. I can tell you one thing. Based on the players, the providers, the adoption, and the communities that I see, in 20 years, the cloud will be wide open. So thank you.